Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Your Full Crew. I am Dawn Zoldi, one of your co-hosts.
Hi, and I'm Mike Peel, your other co host. We have some great guests today and some great articles we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the state of transportation planning with a biennial report that's recently come out. We're going to be talking about AAM advancement in Ohio, where did it go right, where did it go wrong. We're going to be talking about Japan's smart cities and how they're building them from scratch. And then we're going to cap the hour off with a controversial article about Tesla owner beta testing driver functions with his own children. So lots of interesting stuff. I want to remind you, if you like the podcast, please subscribe on our YouTube channel, hit the like button and the notification bell if you never want to miss out, or go to fullcrew.io and subscribe there. First up on our guest list, we've got Rex Alexander. Rex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name's Rex Alexander. I'm the president and executive director for 5 Alpha, an aeronautical consultancy. Also am the infrastructure advisor for Vertical Flight Society. About 40 years in aviation with about the last 25 in vertical lift infrastructure.
Thanks, Rex. And we also have Yolanka Wulff.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Yolanka Wulff. I'm the Executive Director of CAMI, the Community Air Mobility Initiative. We're a 501c3 nonprofit working to support the responsible and sustainable integration of advanced air mobility into our daily transportation needs. Specifically, we work with state and local public agencies, elected officials, planners, to educate, to communicate, and to collaborate on opportunities to integrate advanced air mobility into a multimodal transportation system. My background is as a nonprofit and startup small business attorney and consultant, and I've spent the last 12 years in advanced air mobility.
And by the way, everybody, fun fact, Yolanka and Rex were on the Donna Drones podcast last year. So go back and check that out. Those are all on Drone Life TV, so subscribe there as well.
Yeah, we also had Yolanka on our Twitter Spaces, what was it, 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago in San Francisco.
Yeah, fantastic. That was an awesome deep dive. If you have some time to go to our Twitter account and check that out. So you brought to our attention a really cool report. It's biennial, so it's the state of transportation planning. Give us a little summary about what's going on in this 350-page report, which is of such an important topic like transportation advancement.
Absolutely. So every other year, the American Planning Association publishes this report, State of Transportation Planning, and they typically take a certain theme through their report. So this report just recently came out, and I picked it because for the first time, it actually refers to advanced air mobility. It talks about urban air taxis, etc. So I thought that was very interesting that that has now moved into their list of modes, along with Hyperloop and autonomous cars and tunnels, etc. The subtitle of the report is Intersections and Identities: A Radical Rethinking of Transportation Experiences. The reason I picked this report, and I just want to kind of pull on some of the themes in the report and how they impact or work with advanced air mobility. The report starts off with a statement from Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, and what is clear is that a major theme that runs through this report is equity. And the reason it's important to kind of pull together this transportation planning world and advanced air mobility is that a lot of the work that we do is to educate planners about advanced air mobility. Advanced air mobility to date has come out of the tech side. It's been a tech push. It's come about through a convergence of technologies to allow industry to create these new aircraft. But in doing so, and in looking at the opportunities that are there for integration of aviation, or this third dimension, into transportation systems, we see the coming together of two communities that typically have not worked together. On the one side is aviation, which typically as a mode of transportation has operated on its own under federal regulation. And on the other side is the very local, regional, and statewide transportation planning and implementation and regulation process. So, this report addressing it, which is whose audience is planners, is important in that it's bringing advanced air mobility into the picture. It's also really important for the advanced air mobility industry, the OEMs, the operators, etc., to understand the lens through which planners, transportation planners especially, will consider this mode.
So kind of two things there. One, this, even thinking about equity in transportation seems like a shift in focus from what we might imagine this report being 20, 30 years ago. But also, it seems like AAM is, on a completely separate line, is forcing the joining of airspace considerations and transportation. Is this because the infrastructure itself actually has to be built to support AAM within urban environments?
Yes, in large part that is a piece of it. But I think even stepping back or going one level higher, I think what we're seeing is the idea that we would use aviation, that we'd use aircraft to move people in ways that typically, if they were going to move now, they would be using ground transportation. Whereas to date, we've used aviation primarily to cover longer distances in a much shorter time. Something that we might use rail, but maybe rail wouldn't take you between point A and point B without going through C and D and taking much, much longer. But when you look at using aviation to connect within cities, between cities, even between urban areas and rural areas or suburbs, and to connect to hub airports from outlying areas, those are in many ways new uses for aviation. To date we've covered that with ground transportation, but it also means that aviation needs to intersect with those other modes. We see this now if you look at a regional transportation system. Light rail and buses talk to each other. They coordinate. Transportation planners look for ways to make seamless trips and really look at a trip from the perspective of the traveler, the complete trip from door to door. Aviation to date has never been a door-to-door or even part of a door-to-door system. It's been airport to airport. And of course, over the last X decades, that has become very much, at least in this country, a hub and spoke type system rather than a more broadly networked system. So yes, it is certainly looking at using aviation in a different way and integrating it with other modes of transportation.
Yeah, that's significant because we alluded to the San Francisco event. By the way, it was called The Future of Aviation. It was co-sponsored by Caltrans and UC Berkeley. Yolanka and her team at CAMI had a AAM 101 kind of co-located event to kick off the week on Monday. But this is so key what you said, Yolanka. So many of these planners, they don't have AAM on the brain, and conversely, the AAM crowd, they really need to understand that planning mindset. And this document bridges that gap, as do you and what you do with CAMI in having these AAM 101 conversations with local governments. As I think through this, North Central Texas Council of Government is one crowd that's been doing a lot of great stuff. But Ohio, they were the first ones to put out that roadmap, right? We're going to get to that in a second. But Rex, that's your piece you want to talk about. But before we get to the roadmap, I'd like your thoughts on what Yolanka has presented.
No, Yolanka brings up some excellent points, and in working with CAMI for the last couple of years, I think one of the challenges we see at the local level is the disconnect between land use and airspace use. And there's two completely different languages and two completely different audiences. So when we work on people moving in the aviation spectrum that never have, and that was one of the things that was brought out in the Ohio, that how many people have never ever flown before. And to add this next layer of aviation, which is the shorter distance we've never done before, public acceptance is going to be a challenge. So in looking at where we're going in the future, I think what CAMI is looking at from the equity and the equality standpoint of transportation availability, it's going to be huge at the local level specifically. I don't see it being too broad at the federal level, but it's going to be a game changer at the local level that needs to be paid close attention to. So I applaud all the work that CAMI's doing in that space and trying to engage the local municipalities, because getting them to learn the language of aviation for land use is key to having good ordinances and a good path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, I know before we get to the Ohio, what Ohio is doing, which by the way, I think Yolanka's in Ohio right now, ironically, in her hotel room on her phone. Yep. So,
I am.
Yeah. So I think we had a couple comments in the chat, Mike.
Yeah, so Henze Gustav, hello. And CJ Smith, friend of the show, hello. So we got two hellos. Thank you. Everybody, feel free to comment, ask our guest questions. We're here for the whole hour, and we will respond at regular intervals. So
yeah, and I'll tell you, there's no better people to ask about advanced air mobility, particularly on the public acceptance equity side and infrastructure side, than these two right here. So, this is your prime opportunity to hear straight from the world-renowned experts on this stuff. So, Rex, let's talk about Ohio.
Sure.
And what they're doing. What's this framework that they put out?
No, they published a paper, and it was originally put together specifically for this week. The event that Yolanka's at is the event that this paper was centered around. So what they were looking at doing is kind of putting together a roadmap. And I don't want to say it was a how to is more as a how to start and who to involve. Overall, I think it was a great effort, very well thought out. The research was done, was pretty in-depth. They covered a significant amount of territory, more so than I've seen a lot of other documents and papers. They point out to a lot of the key stakeholders that need to be engaged, and I think that's one of the key elements is when we look at federal, state, and local. And the land use, like I said, that's going to be a big one, and they do identify that as a major issue right out of the gate.
I'm going to ask. I was going to ask you what you like about this thing, but before you get to that, Rex, Yolanka, what is exactly the event that you're at?
So this is an event sponsored by Drive Ohio, the organization behind the report that Rex is talking about, and it has been called the National Advanced Air Mobility Industry Forum. So we're here for 2 days. Today will be starts about an hour after this podcast ends. Will be a number of presentations at the Hollenbeck Bailey Arts and Cultural Center at Clark State. And then tomorrow we'll be out at Springfield Beckley the airport for demonstrations and presentations. I'm on a panel towards the end of the day tomorrow that's moderated by Abby Smith, the Deputy Director of the UAS Integration Office at FAA, and we'll be talking about kind of major metropolitan areas and integration of advanced air mobility.
Awesome. And so back to Rex, they created this document really in preparation for this event that Yolanka's at right now.
Right.
So tell them what you like about it.
No, I think when we look at a lot of the things that are in that document, I saw that they talked about, the weather. They talked about the microclimates, which is something that a lot of people have not really looked at.
Except for Don Bershoff from True Weather.
Don Bershoff, God bless Don for beating that drum, because that is such a huge component of doing this and doing it safely. When we look at some of the other pieces, I was really happy to see that they pulled out fire code and the authorities having jurisdictions, also known as AHJs, and they actually put that in their document and referenced that. So in looking at the overall holistic approach, it's very inclusive. I was very impressed that they did the research, they did the work, and they really gave the individuals at that local level a pretty broad and inclusive group that they need to consider when they're sitting down at the table and saying, what does advanced air mobility mean? How are we going to embrace it? How are we going to regulate it? What are we going to do for oversight, and what are the standards? Now, it's a good footprint for a starting position, I think.
That's awesome. But on the flip side, as you read it, what jumped out at you as like, hey, this is kind of key and it's missing?
There were a few items, and it's only because of being involved in this for so long and living and eating and breathing this for 24/7. I would like to have seen a little bit more on the airspace protection, because when we get into what we're going to do in this advanced air mobility piece, that's a huge issue today with private use heliports, is the FAA has no authority to protect that airspace. Along with that, there's the oversight authority. Who's going to have oversight? It doesn't really get into that. I know that if it's private use, the FAA doesn't have any. So then it goes to the state, and every state in the U.S. is different. So I think harmonization is one that I'd like to see kind of beat on a little bit harder, and that's harmonization and standardize state to state, because when we look at doing these business models in different states and different municipalities, doing it differently at each location you go to is going to be really painful, challenging, time-consuming, and expensive. So I'd love to see more work done on that harmonization state to state, because that will then push down to the local level.
Mike is raising his hand, Rex. We got to respect Mike.
I have a question. I normally don't raise my hand, but
no, go ahead, please.
So, I mean, isn't a possible solution here? Normally, private isn't handled, but if we're talking about a fully automated system for takeoff and landing, isn't it possible to inject some regulation there, because it's a different use case? There's not a pilot.
That could be. It depends on you have to differentiate the operation of flight versus infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So the infrastructure itself, if it's private use, if it's considered private use, right now we have no regulation that gives FAA any authority over that. Now the operation, if it's conducted under Part 135, there are rules that speak to that. And there is a difference, because when you get into Part 121 operations today, they're conducted generally at Part 139 airports. 139 airports are required to be certified. Today, heliports, if you look at the 139 regulation and standard, they're exempt. And there's only 58 public use heliports in the United States out of 6,000 plus, so almost 6,000 private use. The FAA can't step in and stop anything. Now the Part 135 decimal 229 says that all landing areas shall be adequate. That's a little bit loose for, I think, what the public's looking for from assurances that this infrastructure will be safe and integrated properly. So I think there's a lot to be said there. One of the things that we've been pushing the FAA to consider is a rulemaking change. Today they only have public use and private use as identified case uses. A lot of states recognize commercial use, and I think there's a big effort in that space to look at what commercial use could be done, what the adoption of commercial use as a use case could do to give authority and oversight to the FAA in this space.
And Yolanka, I think you had your hand up too.
Yeah. A couple of comments on this report. First, I want to say that I think Ohio's done a fabulous job at looking at advanced air mobility strategically and from a system-wide perspective. This report was preceded by a year and a half ago or 2 years ago now by another report that was an excellent analysis of the market demand and economic benefits of integrating advanced air mobility. And this report, pulls from that, including the 6 use cases that were identified in that prior report that was published by Crown Consulting and Nexa Capital Partners. So I really commend Ohio. They've looked at the 6 major cities. They've looked at, in particular, use cases like logistics and how things are moved now, and how adding advanced air mobility to that mix can create real economic benefit for the state and its people. The other piece I wanted to mention, kind of tagging on to what Rex was just saying there, and tying back to the report that I contributed to today's conversation, and this idea of how a planner would look at this. One of the interesting things in the report, the biennial report from APA, is that they really have emphasized in there that from a local regional planning perspective, they are looking, planners and elected officials and agencies are looking at strategic goals to create these more compact multimodal communities, to make sure that they reduce vehicle miles traveled, reduce sprawl, and so one of their conclusions is that because modes like advanced air mobility tend to increase total vehicle travel and sprawl and displace resource efficient modes like transit and rail, they'll have to be implemented with strong transportation demand management incentives and smart growth development policies that encourage travelers to choose the most efficient mode for their trip. And so I think that not only do we have to kind of understand this intersection of airspace and land use, but we have to look at, recognize that planners are going to look at this mode within that larger framework of equity and smart growth, and understand how advanced air mobility can contribute to that rather than detract from that.
Well, that was a big theme of the conference, I think, in San Francisco, this idea it needs to complement, not compete. Efficiency is great, but you know what? I have sufficient funds that I'm not relegated to eating ramen, every night, like the 10-cent, ramen pack, right? Like maybe, some college students or something like that. So it has to be also cost effective, right? So efficiency is great, but even I am going to take like Spirit Air. If it's going to save me like $200, then, taking an American Airlines, even it's going to be a little bit more painful, and it's going to take me, frankly, longer. So, when you think about kind of traveler expectations and serving travelers, they're looking for the cheapest ride, the best ride. I mean, this is complex. Rex, I'm going to go back to you and ask, in this Ohio roadmap that Yolanka and her folks are talking about over the next couple days, I believe there's a lot of work to be done, clearly, on this equity aspect, infrastructure, public acceptance, efficiency, cost effectiveness. What work needs to still be done, in your opinion?
There's a lot of things that we need to look at and pay very close attention to. I think one of the things I see, this is a pet peeve of mine when I work with local municipalities, when they write ordinances. And one of the things is terminology, just agreeing on the right terminology. So they use the term helipad as an example. Well, helipad is not really defined by the FAA as anything. It's a part of a heliport. So if you write an ordinance and require all helipads to meet a certain standard, we're only actually enforcing a part of a heliport. So just having the right terminology in place is huge. I think one of the biggest issues we have today for infrastructure that the FAA needs to really step up to the plate and identify, fix, and work on is the data capture. We have a lot of facilities across the United States, both airports and heliports, that aren't in the system. And that data that's in the system is inaccurate. So when we look at vertiports, how we capture the data, what data are we capturing, how is it researched and validated is huge. Today, we have no idea how many rooftop heliports there are versus ground heliports because we don't capture that data. What's the max gross weight that a rooftop heliport can accept? That's not captured. You wouldn't know until you showed up.
Mike's got a shocked face, by the way. Mike just went,
yeah.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah, and then it's a very airport-centric data field. So it says, what's the runway width and runway length? Well, it's not a runway. It's a TLOF, FADO, and a safety area. We don't capture that data. And then the biggest one is we don't capture the approach departure paths. So it's utterly impossible to protect airspace that's not actually listed. So there's a lot to be done in that space with the FAA and the data capture and making sure that we have accurate data. So when we do flight planning, we're doing it with accurate information. I did a deep dive on Ohio 2019 on every facility they had, and the data that was in the system at the time did not jive with what was actually there. We found 44 hospitals that were missing, active hospitals. One was an EMS base that's operational 24/7. And in that space, it's like, okay, how are you going to do beyond visual line of sight operations when you don't know that that exists? How are you going to avoid that, or at least know that it's there? So I think that's one that nobody's really talked about, and I think it's a huge piece.
Well, I know
I'm
you're
sure
talking about it, Rex, because I mean, I listened to the FAA had the Beyond Visual Line of Sight Aviation Rulemaking Committee listening session, and you were out there saying these things. I know it was only 5 minutes. They cut you off. I know you get to submit some things, but I mean, I think anybody listening to that kind of like I got the Mike face, like, what? Yeah. Like, we're going to do BVLOS flying blind. We don't even know there's 44 hospitals with active heliports, some 24/7 in Ohio alone. That's significant. So, yeah.
The big one, and we talked about this before, what's a drone port? How are you going to account for that? What's the airspace look like? How do you chart that? Nobody's said anything about that.
Yeah, and are there different versions for that based on the size of the drone and the scale of the operation? And, it might be that if you're only flying one or two drones personally, that's a completely different situation than trying to run a fleet out of the back of a Walmart like DroneUp would, or, so it's a lot to consider. And if you don't have that data, time to start recording it now, right? Because, if you don't have it there to even make inferences from, making inferences from too little data is dangerous also. You could extrapolate in the wrong way. So
Totally agree.
Absolutely great stuff so far. Thank you so much, Yolanka and Rex. We're going to take a quick break just to thank our sponsors. We've got a new one this week starting L-Site, and we're really excited to have them. We've had them on the Dawn of Drones podcast before. They've been great supporters of Dawn and I's work in the past, and they have amazing technology. So take a look at their website. We also have returning Dragonfly, Vodix, and the Drone Code Foundation. So I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting this show. And just another reminder, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. So the next article we're going to hit up is from me. And so I'm going to be taking a trip to Japan if everything works out. I know Ramon's probably listening today, so he's going to be coming with me. We're going to go with the Drone Code Foundation to the Ross Expo that's happening there. So that's robotics. And I kind of, thinking about infrastructure with what Yolanka and Rex had been bringing to the table today. I found this article about smart cities, and I thought it was interesting because the central planning for these things in Japan, I think there's 3 mentioned in the article, all of which are kind of sponsored or brought to you by Panasonic. Um, which it makes it even more central. It's not just the government planning, it's centrally, it's almost like a company town, which I think has very different contexts in Japan culturally with the Zaibatsu than it does here. But also, is that even something that's workable? So in this article, what's really interesting is they have everything down from facial recognition to even sleep patterns are being tracked to help people, I don't know, with airflow so they could sleep better. With Japan, the concern here and the reason that these kind of smart towns, actually, they're pretty small, anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people, but fully sustainable systems with, you know, solar panels, and you see this nice little friendly robot there, is that they have an aging population that they need to take care of, and that's why there's an interest in kind of building this from soup to nuts kind of smart city solution. I guess my question to our guests and Dawn is, can you centrally plan something like that to operate at scale? It's one thing to have 2,000 people for like almost a retirement village, but it seems almost antithetical to the way that humans kind of conduct themselves, that you would be able to plan everybody's sleep patterns in a city and, you know, the HVAC systems around that. So who wants to go first? Rex? Yolanka?
Sure. I think it's the biggest challenge is the information overload. It's like a computer may be able to dissect some of this on a regular basis, but how do I get it to the individuals in the community? Because there's only so much bandwidth that allows for communications. And when you're looking at some of this, we talk about this is how do you present information that's actionable in a real-time environment? And that's a real struggle. And how much information is viable information? We get inundated with so much garbage every single day. When we're trying to make decisions, it's like, okay, I can't make a decision because I have no idea what information
data glut
is the right information. It's like, it's just overwhelming for the average person. We deal with that in aviation all the time. It's like, how much information should I introduce to the cockpit that won't overwhelm the pilot, so he's now so confused and distracted that he's not getting anything accomplished and he's no longer flying the aircraft. Or she.
And you know,
They.
This kind of frightens me a little bit. You know, going back, kind of riffing off of what Rex said earlier about, you know, kind of language and, you know, this whole idea of service, and that Yolanka's report brought up. What are we really doing here? You know, like with collecting information on sleep patterns for airflow, like that's a little weird and frightening to me, honestly. You know, what is I guess I could see this. Oh, we're getting photobombed by a little puppy back there. I just squirreled, sorry. I guess I could see the value of that, but are people opting into this, or is this just like
this is an opt-in only system for the facial tracking, so any of the other systems would have to be supported by, you know, not identifying you specifically. So we got two comments. Chris Wedgeworth is Part 108 real. That's probably from a little while ago, but we have Kisuki Yasukochi. Sorry if I got your name a little wrong. Didn't even know this is happening, even living here in Japan. So
oh wow, you heard it here first. And Yolanka has a comment, it looks like.
I do. So kind of going back to this your question, Mike, about you know, this is 2,000 people. What does this look like when you expand it? So first, you know, I think we're seeing this in other places as well. I know in the Netherlands, they have created Alzheimer or dementia villages where they do similar tracking, and it allows people who have dementia to interact at in a small town village type setting, but safely with trackers and things like that. So you know, I don't think this is unique to Japan. I think it will look differently wherever you were. But I do think from a scalability perspective, I think, my thought would be that there's a certain kind of functional unit size for which this works. I think that, scaling this up to a large city size maybe isn't as feasible as creating kind of these modules of, and maybe 2,000 people is the right number, maybe 5,000 people is the right number. But I think part of what works about this is the community aspect. And so I would be curious to see if they're actually thinking they can scale this up to the million people size, or would they be just more modules like this?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the article doesn't kind of let you know which way they're thinking. I think it's inferring that, but probably not likely. But, just thinking about it with a little bit of different spin, how is this different than, a normal development in the United States or a gated community, right? If everybody knows that when they buy property there, they're opting into that community's systems, and that includes, garbage collection, electricity, etc., it kind of makes sense. But a modular approach seems like it seems more likely that there would be hundreds of these or thousands of these than it would be a complete top-down thing like giant cities like New York or Los Angeles or Tokyo, for example.
I guess what scares me about this, because I'm generally speaking a glass half empty kind of gal, is the dark side of this. I mean, this might be far-fetched, but going back to Rex's point about like words matter and how we define things. How are we defining this term smart city? Because if that by definition, or at least for this community, means we're collecting your facial information, we're collecting your sleep patterns, and they're using it to help them, like Yolanka said, for example, in the Netherlands village with Alzheimer's patients. But, what about the dark side? I mean, who's to say that like somebody hacks this, or what can be done with that information? I've been watching The Man in the High Castle, and I know this is just fiction, but, here, just in the show last night, the spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it yet, there's a young man, one of the lead Nazi son, he has muscular dystrophy, and they learn it through a routine physical. And that means he needs to be euthanized because he's a useless eater. And so, like, again, taking this to the nth degree of you collect this data from people, what can be done with it? I mean, we talked about this, remember, Mike, was it last week or the week before, with the AI that was going through hospital records for preventive medicine, like,
yeah.
Oh, this is so great.
Will never be
can
used
tell
for
you in
insurance,
advance.
was the claim.
Yeah, and like, oh, your insurance won't be raised, but it's like, really?
If the information's there, it'll be found.
Yeah, what else can be done with this info? I would want very strict rules around this data can be used for if I'm opting in. And what I hate to see is a whole bunch of these communities, nowhere else to live. You have almost like, to use your computer, you have to sign that little consent thing, even though nobody reads it, what they're going to use it for. It's like, I have no choice but to live here. And so I guess I'm signing the dotted line, and God knows what my information is going to be used for. So
I almost think there's, there might be in a perfect future, it would be understood that a person couldn't possibly recognize what they're signing over. If it's past a certain amount of information, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think you look at some of the other countries out there that are using this data as a weapon. So we look at how this creates a kind of a dystopian influence. Is you have a scale, you have a citizenship scale, and if you do certain things, it goes up. If you do other things or don't participate in things, it goes down, and that influences your ability to travel, buy things, where you can work. It's really scary.
That's like Black Mirror type stuff. I don't know if anybody's watched that show. They had an episode where it was like social media, same thing, Rex. Like how many likes you got from people. Like when you ordered your coffee, like the barista would like rate you as a customer. And if you didn't get a lot of likes, exactly that, like you start getting ostracized, you can't buy coffee there anymore. Yeah, just interesting
Yeah,
stuff. I think we have a couple comments.
Yeah, we've got a couple comments. Tony Drummond's got two. There must be 100 smart city concepts. They are all idealistic, and some concepts are frankly disconnected. Yeah, this is one of the things with smart cities. It's almost like what we saw, I would say, 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago with like AAM, air taxi type thing, where it was sold as the flying car. Um, and then another question from her, or comment from her. Dawn, we heard a lot of information, not very realistic operationally. So I asked her to elaborate on misinfo. Hopefully that Tony will get back to us. And then we also have Chris Wedgeworth, scary. So we have been talking a little bit about the scarier aspects, but I do want to kind of return to some of the functional stuff, like electric grid stuff. Having the solar panels built in and that kind of managed from the get-go, having other kind of streetlight systems work in terms of foot traffic flow, if there's going to be cars coming down that road versus more people at any time of day. These are all things that I think are net positives. But yes, we have to discuss these things from the data perspective and the data aggregation perspective, especially when, in this case, you'd be signing into a private community, owned by not owned or run by a corporation. Wasn't very clear. That's a lot of personal data to give over to somebody just to have these little niceties that you could probably get outside of that anyway. So Chris Wedgeworth also said that was on The Simpsons about the coffee shop. So
it was on Black Mirror too.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yolanka, what do you have?
Yeah.
For us?
So first of all, Man the High Castle, great series, and yes, clearly dystopian, but fabulous show. But I also just want to interject here that the term smart cities gets tossed around a lot, and I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, let's dump the idea of smart cities. There's a lot of good work going on around smart cities, and I'm just going to call out where I'm sitting right now. Columbus, Ohio, won the first Smart City Challenge that was held by the USDOT, and they got $50 million in grant funding. And the designation as America's Smart City. And what they're doing is reinventing transportation to accelerate human progress. So I think that we can go down a dystopian path. We can also, with some guardrails, with some boundaries, also do a lot of great things with technology that improves the human condition. So I just don't want to be too bright line black and white about it.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I totally agree. I feel like there's a major difference between collecting people's sleep patterns, eating habits, and anonymized foot traffic. So like when the lights needs to change, right? For
Yes.
or where there's surge, traffic times.
Exactly.
In an area.
Or even something as something like MaaS, mobility as a service, where you have an app that allows kind of the complete trip perspective, where I, as a traveler, want to go from A to B, and I, through an app, can see my different choices, see what different combinations I can take, what it will cost, how much time it will take, and I can make my choice kind of irrespective of what company is providing what service.
Yeah,
I think DC does that with the metro. I mean, with their metro, but you can check and see how long it's going to take if you go this way or that way. And I think that's great. You're right. Informed choices.
Yeah, we got a great comment from Tony that kind of wraps into my perspective on this. So at least at the last conference, we had a lot of conflicting information, theoretical versus actually operationally viable. It's slightly confusing. We need to define smart cityscapes. So I think a simpler way to understand what the next step is more like digital transformation for city systems, right? So in Yolanka's example of you use the app and that gives you, the direct path from point A to point B and point C, so you can get there as easy as possible without having to, like look on the phone, see the bus schedule, map that with the train schedule, etc. Now, also take the fact that we've ingested that data and now it affects the transportation systems themselves, how they self-organize. Do we run an extra bus today? Do we change the light pattern so the buses can get through at this hour more readily without stopping the regular flow of traffic? That's kind of the next evolution, and without that data layer, you can't do that. You're on the same system that we're on now, which is the lights go off and on at this interval, and we think that works until we see a traffic jam, and then we respond the next day.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So circling back to advanced air mobility, I think that begs an interesting question, because you're right. It's not just there's the planning aspect and the regulatory aspect, but there's real-time operations and optimization of that. And we see some of that now in transportation systems within metropolitan regions, where if you have bus transit and light rail, and let's say you have a light rail line go down, now you've got to have the transit company come in with more buses to kind of accommodate. I think what is interesting, will be interesting, is to see how we integrate real-time operations with aviation, with advanced air mobility, because again, it's not a place where aviation's used to going. To kind of adjust real-time operations based on non-aviation transportation factors. So, but I think that will be critical for the success of the system, including the success of advanced air mobility. If you have a light rail line go down and you've got a vertiport at a busy light rail station where people switch modes and that light rail line is down, how does that affect the urban air taxi operations if there's no point in bringing people there? So, and vice versa, you have a bad weather day and people can't take their air taxis to that light rail station to get on their light rail ride for the next leg. So I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done in how we do real-time operations optimization, adding this new mode.
So we're getting close to the hour, so we really want to get into the headline grabber with children and Tesla and beta testing and are children getting run over or not, and how stupid is this man in the article, Dawn? So.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So first of all, this really is all about a video that was posted on YouTube that was titled, "Does Tesla Full Self-Driving Beta Really Run Over Kids?" ? And I think really this qualifies under stupid human tricks. So this was a guy who is an owner and investor in Tesla. His name is, let's see, Ted Park. He tested the full self-driving feature on his own children. I mean, when you think about the article we just discussed, this idea of these robots reading, like monitoring sleep patterns, there's a consent aspect to this, right? Whether in the Netherlands or in Japan, people are opting in, or their guardians, in the case of people with Alzheimer's, are opting in to these systems, knowing supposedly what the information could be. Kids can't consent to this stuff, so it's like, oh, hey, little Johnny, just like stand there. I'm gonna like test my Tesla on you. It's absolutely insane. Now the car did not run over the kids.
As beta, so it's understood
beta,
that it's
for
not
God's
complete
sakes.
Technology. Yes.
I mean, we don't even test shampoo on human kids. And like we're gonna test whether this car is gonna stop in time on little children. I mean, so this article is about the fact that YouTube took that video down because it violated their harmful and dangerous content policy. But, again, just the underlying issue of testing the beta on your own kids and putting it out on YouTube, just absolutely insane in my humble opinion. Oh, by the way, fun facts here. And the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency, which is kind of the governing body that puts out standards for these automated driving systems and these autonomous ground vehicles, of course, issued a warning and said, hey, please don't be testing your systems on your human kids or any humans at all, for that matter. Basically, they're doing the investigation because there was, let's see, several crashes, between 273 crashes between July 20th, 2021 and May 21st, 2022, with Tesla vehicles using their autopilot. So there's a big NHTSA investigation undergoing on this particular function, which, by the way, seemed a lot of these crashes involved parked public safety vehicles. So this guy's tested it on his kids. I'd love to hear some thoughts on this. Rex, you first.
Wow. It's like, hey,
what else can you say?
Like, hey, you're going to be a test dummy today, okay? Just stand there. Trust me.
Don't move.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, it's when you first went down that road, I get this mental picture of the video of the guy that invented bulletproof glass, and he was holding it up in front of him while his wife shot it. I'm like, okay.
At least it was him. At least he was going to take the bullet, not his freaking kids.
It's like, hey, hold this, and I'm going to shoot at you. Yeah, it's kind of like, I'd hope that we've evolved to better testing than that, especially with some of this is like, yeah, there's not a lot of margin for error in something like that.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, so
Yolanka.
I mean, I'm stunned. Are we now going to see taglines on products that say "No children were harmed in the manufacture and operation"?
Oh my God! Just like a lawyer. Just like a lawyer. No children were harmed in the testing of this vehicle.
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, so I took a look at this gentleman's YouTube channel, and it's just hours of autopilot kind of driving, the most mundane thing. Clearly he's a Tesla fan and he's trying to push the agenda for Tesla, having his money invested in it. But I think he got a little bit of the Silicon Valley stupidity, because it's one thing to believe that a product is evolving in a positive way and that you have expectations for this technology, but like, who are you proving this to? And yeah, the vehicles were only going at 8 miles per hour, but what was the real point there? That's almost a religious zeal, which is just, I don't know, almost anti-technology in the way that I think about technology as a scientific pursuit, right? You understand that there's some probability of failure, right? You understand that even if this does advance to a certain level, that you wouldn't want to be filming your child getting hurt. And then to kind of post it arrogantly on YouTube and not expect some issues there. I don't know if this kind of falls into the category of child endangerment, but I could see how it would, not being a case.
The two lawyers were shaking our heads. Yes. And oh, by the way, like Tesla, he used a Tesla Model 3. I have one of these. Okay. This full self-driving or FSD software, it doesn't come with the vehicle. Okay. So you have to actually pay an additional $12,000 or $199 a month for a subscription to this, but it is still like in beta and being unlocked. So, I mean, I'll be driving my car along, and don't get me wrong, I love my Model 3. I've got, solar panels to kind of Yolanka's smart city, discussion about, using smart, it's for the electric grid and all and it's great. I don't have to go, fill up the gas tank and all that. But I'll tell you what, there's times where it does some stupid things. I mean, I'll be driving and it'll start screaming at me like somehow I'm too close to something when I'm really not. And it's like jarring. It's like, oh, I almost get in an accident because it's like, holy crap, this thing just yelled at me. And that, the red blinking and, it has a self-parking feature that I tried in a urban area, like in Denver on a crowded street. And it parked me about a foot plus away from the curb where I absolutely would still be in the street. So I was like, all right, yeah, I'll be parking my car from now on. So, I don't have that faith right now on kind of the fully autonomous vehicle, but I'm also not paying the extra $12,000 a year for this functionality either.
Yeah,
Wasn't there a YouTube video of a Tesla hitting an aircraft that individual had called, and the car just went right up underneath his jet and crashed into the jet at slow speed.
I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, they actually proved that if you paint the lines slowly, like if somebody was to go out there with a roller and just slowly, at a certain curve, add new lines. Uh-oh, I lost my camera. It's okay. I'm going to keep talking, but basically the car would drift with those lines. So,
Yeah.
Or
if there are no lines. Yeah, I was just my husband and I just went out to dinner, and we're at this like stoplight, and we were going to make a left, and I'm like, there are no lines here. I mean, it was clearly enough room for like 3 vehicles, and presumably we were in a left turn lane, but it wasn't clear. But absolutely, that's what it reads right now. Those sensors read those lines, and so if they're not, this goes back to infrastructure where we all started. If they're not painted properly, or if someone plays a joke or, like starts painting lines everywhere, it's going to be an ugly day for the autonomous vehicle. I don't know if we totally lost Mike. Are you still there, my
No,
friend?
I'm still here. You could hear me.
Okay,
I
all
just
right.
lost
Okay,
camera.
gotcha. All right. Well, I guess if there was ever a good time for you to lose your screen, it'd be now. We're about 4 minutes out. So, Mike, I don't know if you want to kind of wrap it up.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, I'm a little disoriented from everything going on, but
he's speechless, so I'll keep it going. So we really wanted to thank Rex and Yolanka today. Yolanka, have a great 2 days. We're really eager to hear what comes out of this Ohio event that you're participating in, and please send our regards in this framework, and please bring Rex's comment to the table about let's get some language around vertiports, some data collection on that, and drone ports. And Rex, again, thank you so much for being here,
My
for
pleasure.
your expertise. Fun fact, everybody, later in the year, I think it's November, Rex is going to join us on the Dawn of Drones podcast. So really excited to have him back later this year as well. And Mike, do you want me to announce kind of the upcoming events?
Yeah, please do. We got a lot coming up this week that I'm really excited about.
We sure do. So speaking of Elsight, who is one of our sponsors, we have Elsight CEO Yoav Amitai on our leadership podcast, Full Tilt, tomorrow. I'm really excited to hear Yoav talking about, Mike, do you have it handy? I think it's leading with credibility and communicating well, or something along these lines.
I do not have it handy, but I believe that is it.
It was a long title, and for some reason I didn't drop it in my notes, so I apologize. But Yoav is an incredible leader. Elsight is doing great things. So join us on the Full Tilt tomorrow, 9 a.m. Mountain on the Full Crew website, and also obviously through LinkedIn. Wednesday on the Dawn of Drones, we have this week Jasmine LaFleur. She is the executive director and co-founder of a nonprofit called Greater Than Tech, inspiring underserved communities, and in particular girls, minority girls, to get into STEM careers, including drones. So we're really excited to have Jasmine on the show on Wednesday as we continue our month dedicated to developing industry leaders on the Dawn of Drones, sponsored by Skydio. And then this Thursday, we have, I can't believe we're closing out the month already on Clubhouse, Drone Law Connections. We actually have 2 guests, and I call it like the East and West training centers. We've got very own Colorado Drone Center at CSU with Christopher Robertson, and also Marcy Eisenberg, the co-founder of the Accelerate Unmanned Center of Excellence out there in Leesburg, Virginia. So two great folks talking about what they're doing to develop industry leaders, and they'll be on the Dawn of Drones next week. So that's it for this week. We'll have some tiles at the end kind of highlighting what might be out there for next week as well. So stay tuned. And as Mike said, subscribe and you'll never miss an episode. I think that's all she wrote.